We are live now on AAU TV and live on Asys YouTube channel. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 9th edition of the All Africa Students Union's Africa Students and Youth Summit. Every year we do the summits, and for the past 3 years, we have been to Cape Coast, Kigali, and Rabat. This year, because of the seasons and the times, the peculiarity of the time that we are in, we are unable to converge as we would have wished. But the Secretariat thought that the very meaningful policy discussions that go on every year must come off unabated. So we are employing the medium of technology to come to you with this year's summits. My name is Edmond Akotobamfo, and I'll be hosting the opening statements. Today, we have the Secretary General of the All Africa Students Union. We have the Executive Director and Founder of the Africa Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes. We have Professor Goski Alabi. Professor Goski Alabi is the president of the Lawe Open University based in Ghana. We will later be joined by Dr. Kailash Satyarthi. He is a Nobel Peace Laureate. We also have overall the president of the All Africa Students Union, Engineer Musab Osman, also with us. We will start today's session by receiving the statements of the Secretary General, Mr. Peter Kwesi-Koji. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Excellencies, allow me to take the time to thank you for making time to join us at the opening event of the 9th Africa Students and Youth Summit. We know you are terribly busy people, and yet you have no time to join us. We do not take this lightly. Thank you very much. Let me also take the time to thank all our network partners who have shared this event widely to garner the huge numbers that are watching this live from different parts of the world. We could not have pulled this event together without your solidarity. I also want to say a thank you to the team at Asys, the technical team, the organizing committee members for the hard work that you put together to make sure that we're able to have an event such as the one that we're having now. In particular, I would want to acknowledge the following partners. The first that I'll do is the 100 million campaign, whom we have worked closely over the years to be able to campaign for marginalized children. Then I'll also recognize UNESCO. I'll also recognize the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, Accord. And Accord is the originator of the Global Peace the program that we've been running together and jointly. Again, I want to recognize Education Sub-Saharan Africa. I want to recognize the Global Students Forum, the European Students Union, the International Association of Universities, the Organizing Bureau of European School Students Unions, Global Peace, the Association of African Universities, Lawe Open University, Snake Nation, the Master Plan, the National Union of Students UK, She's the First Campaign, Africa Students and Alumni Forum, and then I would also want to recognize the reference citizens. I'll also want to recognize the Student Initiative for Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Reporting Initiative, the Commonwealth Students Association, the HAQUA Initiative, and our national student unions from all over Africa. Every year, ASU convenes the largest student and youth gathering on the continent under the banner the Africa Students and Youth Summit. The summit is a flagship event, and it brings together young people from all over the continent and in the diaspora to deliberate on the crucial issues that affect education and our common future as young people. This year, we've been joined by students and young people from all over the world due to the collaboration with different organizations from different parts of the world to confront the challenges that have been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Allow me to also use this opportunity to congratulate our student unions for the direct interventions they have contributed to their government's efforts to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. I do hope that when the pandemic passes, we will remember what students and young people did to alleviate the toll of the COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes even at the peril of their lives. I would have wished that we met under normal circumstances. Sadly, these are not normal times. However, one thing is clear: hosting this year's summit in a virtual format should not take away the thrust of the issues, nor the outcomes thereof. In the last couple of months, young people from all over the world have stood together in solidarity to demand accountability from our leaders on various issues. And as we've come to realize, the issues are common to all of us, regardless of our geographical differences. Through the power of solidarity, we've worked together with our colleagues from different regions under the coordination of the 100 Million campaign to demand a fair share of the COVID-19 recovery funds to be allocated to those furthest left behind and those truly in need of the funds. We know that something around 11 million young girls will potentially not return to the classroom when schools prepare to reopen. We also know that a lot of children are being forced into child labor due to the pressures to survive on account of the hardships imposed by this pandemic. This will certainly roll back all the gains we have made in the fight against child labor. If you are not angry at the business as usual approach to the handling of the COVID recovery strategy, this summit is not for you. If you warm up to the idea that what is normal should keep our marginalized brothers and sisters even further away from enjoying the basic fundamental human rights such as education and health, this summit is certainly not for you. We've witnessed in frustration how billions of COVID-19 recovery funds have been allocated to businesses whose owners, even in COVID-19, still enjoy all the privileges hitherto the pandemic, bar a few restrictions to their movement as a result of lockdowns. Young people are asking our leaders crucial questions now more than ever. We're anxious about what in the future holds for us, given everything we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic. As schools shut down earlier this year, we despaired as we saw the tragic consequences on our colleagues who pre-COVID were struggling to get an education. Students have been asked to vacate their rented apartments because they are unable to pay. Given that lockdowns prevent them from holding jobs to support these expenses, why are governments not supporting the students in this regard? Caregivers have lost their jobs in catastrophic proportions, especially those in the informal sector, which has been hardest hit by the pandemic. In Africa and the South, where the informal sector accounts for over 70% of jobs, one can understand why this is a humanitarian emergency. Amid the pandemic, it is further distressing to witness huge budget cuts in education in a time when we must increase spending to protect those furthest behind. My friends and my colleagues from all over the world, we are at the brink of a colossal loss of a generation, our generation, if we do not act now. In the face of these injustices, our conventional methods for holding our governments accountable have been appended. We can no longer march on the streets to protest the injustices that we're witnessing under the pretext of containing the COVID-19 pandemic. Government officials tell us they will not accept hard copy letters when we do walk-ins to deliver petitions that deserve urgent attention. Meanwhile, they take forever to reply emails, even if we are lucky. The irony is that if we send a gift to them, the principle of not receiving items as a measure to contain the spread of COVID-19 will suddenly not mean anything. I cannot understand why anyone would not be angry. This summit is not one to ask for problems, as we already know all the problems. Throughout this year, we've spent endless hours on webinars discussing problems. We are tired, we're frustrated, and we're angry. The summit is not, as we end this year, we'll be looking to find sustainable solutions and to find practical ways to hold our governments accountable. During the summit, spanning today and tomorrow, we will seek to imbibe a sense of urgency in young people to trigger us to act, as to hold our governments accountable to save the loss of a generation. This summit will equally call on governments to increase spending on education to ensure that no group is disproportionately affected by the impact of the pandemic. This summit would support the call by UNESCO to get girls back to school. The summit will also highlight the cruel manner in which the COVID-19 has affected our marginalized brothers and sisters and offer a recommended path to build back better. The ninth summit will re-echo and ensure that governments, key institutions, and key actors become more responsive and conscious of the needs of students, young people, and marginalized groups and amid the pandemic. The ninth summit will also forge stronger solidarity among young people to build broad coalitions to support a robust COVID-19 recovery that leaves no one behind. Lastly, the ninth summit will adopt a global strategy to rally young people to act in solidarity, to hold our governments accountable, to execute a COVID-19 recovery agenda that is equitable and inclusive. And this will adapt the Global Youth Compact to build back better. This year, we have challenged our leaders on several forums and at every opportunity, and we have done so together. We've done so on the sidelines of the G20 summit, on the UNGA, and at other key events. In doing so, we have seen how independent we are and realize our only true path to holding our governments accountable is doing so together in solidarity. Together, we have achieved so much more than going at it alone. And as we plan to build back better, we in solidarity. If anything, we've seen that our problems are common and they befit a common response. On behalf of the All Africa Students Union and all our partners and members, I welcome all the speakers, all delegations, the organizers and participants to the 9th Africa Students and Youth Summit. I want to thank you very much for joining us for the summit and do hope that you join us for all the remaining sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Kwesi-Koji. If you are not annoyed by business as usual, this summit is not for you. If you are not annoyed by business as usual, this summit is not for you. You really want to take an action, come to asys2020.asuonline.org/resources. There are several actions that you can take on several projects that we are currently running, and we are hoping that you will find a place to act. Our next speaker, Dr. Vasu Gordon, is Executive Director and founder of the African Center for Constructive Resolution of Disputes, ACCORD, which was founded in 1992. He's a lawyer and a mediator, trainer and researcher in the field of conflict management, and has been involved in preparing conflict parties across Africa for negotiations. He serves on boards of several institutions across the world involved in conflict management, and he has addressed the United Nations Security Council on matters relating to conflict management and has been elected by the World Economic Forum as one of their global leaders for tomorrow. Dr. Vasu is going to speak to the students and youth of Africa, and we are ready to listen to him. Dr. Vasu, the floor is yours.
This is an indication of the generation that I come from, that I did not unmute my mic whilst I was speaking. So I have already given away my generation. Let me firstly thank you, moderator, and let me also thank the All Africa Students Union for this invitation. It's a great honor for me, and I'll say why in a few minutes. Secretary General Peter Koji, President Musab Ahmed Osman. I know that the moderator said that I prepare conflicting parties around the world, on the continent, and currently we are working with your country. So I was in your country 2 weeks ago, where we were meeting with the Prime Minister and the members of the Sovereign Council. So we are actively involved in your country in preparing parties for the ongoing political negotiations there. So I'm happy to see you here also as a young leader from Sudan. Professor Alabi, it was a pleasure talking to you earlier and also to share this platform with you. Let me start by saying that since I already gave away my generation by not switching on and unmuting myself, I should say that I come from also a earlier generation. 35 years ago, I was a student president here in South Africa during the state of emergency. We were still under the apartheid regime at the time, and we were fighting against the apartheid regime. Of course, we were led in prison by Nelson Mandela. And at the time, during the state of emergency, when I was a student president, we were told by our leaders in exile in our liberation movement that at that point in our history, to make the country ungovernable. So my mandate as a student leader was to lead the thousands of students onto the streets of our cities and to turn the place ungovernable. And I think we did it with excellence, so that not even 5 years later, the apartheid regime was dismantled, and we entered our negotiations to create a new South Africa, which came into being in 1994 with Nelson Mandela being elected its first president. Why do I raise this? I raise this because Ghana, where you are sitting now, Peter, where you are, Professor Alabi, was liberated in the 60s. Many African countries were liberated during that period. I think what many people don't know, Musab, is that Sudan was the first to be liberated. I think many people don't realize that. Actually, it was Sudan. Many people think it might have been Ghana or one of the other countries, but it was actually Sudan that was liberated. I remember, and it could even be 58, 59, I think it probably was. So we had then a generation of leaders who attempted to reconstruct our countries. I think they were well-meaning, many like Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere and Robert Mugabe and Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt, and Kenneth Kaunda and others. These were all the great leaders of Africa who set up the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, and they set about attempting to now transform our countries. We have to say that almost 50 years later, as the African Union celebrated 50 years of liberation, the record is not a good one on the continent. And my generation and the generations before me, we are now stand accused of handing over the baton to your generation, to all of you, Edmund and Musab and Peter. We hand over the baton to you, but we also hand over the burden to you. And it's unfortunate that, you know, we hand the burden and the baton at the same time, when in fact we should have given you a prosperous Africa, one in which you are not burdened with the challenges of the day. Now let me turn to those challenges, because these are serious challenges that you will face as a new generation, and you will have to liberate this continent of those challenges. COVID-19 that came onto our continent at the beginning of this year is an indication of what we will be experiencing in this next decade. Earlier, I was with a fellow student leader of my generation, and we were having breakfast together this morning. And he was the former head of Amnesty International and head of Greenpeace, Kumi Naidu. We were together this morning, and we were talking about the fact that this generation will inherit one of the most serious challenges that humanity has ever seen. and that COVID-19 is just a teaser for what is to come. We have been talking for decades now about a pandemic. Nobody was prepared for the pandemic or anticipated the intensity of this pandemic. It's not the first pandemic. There was one in 1918. It's not the last pandemic that we will see. And as we move into the future, the frequency of these pandemics might be even quicker. So you will be burdened with and saddled with more challenges. In addition to the health challenge that we have been facing now over several months, we know that measures taken to stem the spread of the virus have led to an economic crisis, the proportions of which we have never seen for now several decades. We know from what is coming out from the Economic Commission for Africa, from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, that Africa will go into a recession. Many of our countries are saddled with debt, having to respond to the health crisis. This debt means that essential services, like Peter has been talking about, education, will be denied the kind of resources that it needs to transform the lives of young people. Healthcare will be compromised. It is already compromised because of the need to respond urgently to the COVID-19 crisis. We have not been able to respond to primary vaccination for polio and measles, smallpox. And these are going to have repercussions for decades to come, where an entire generation will not have been vaccinated because we had to respond to this crisis. Healthcare, housing, education, water, sanitation, all of the essential services will be compromised as we go into the future, as our countries begin to recover. We know that when there is this kind of challenge, where we cannot meet our basic needs, where there will be food insecurity, that these will lead to a security crisis. So a health crisis has led to an economic crisis, which will lead to a security crisis, which we know will lead to a humanitarian crisis. This is the burden that your generation is going to have to inherit and work with. I said earlier on, Peter, that I have great hope, because when I look at the All Africa Students Union, the level of your organization, the level of your innovation, the level of your creativeness, I have huge hope that you will be able to meet these challenges of the future. And you talked earlier on, Peter, about making governments accountable. And I think you must make governments accountable. You must hold my generation and the generations before me accountable for the use of your parents' tax money and the tax money that you will be putting out in the future, to make sure that it is used properly to benefit young people and to create an enabling environment for you. But I want to challenge you, Peter, and all of the young people who are listening to this today, to move beyond accountability to become the architects of the future. This is the first time in the history of humanity that a younger generation is able to teach an older generation because of the diffusion of technology across the world. You are the masters of technology. You are now the masters of innovation also. Just think about all of the instruments of technology in your possession. 3D printing, for example, that will bring a huge revolution in innovations that can deal with all of the problems that we are facing. So I want to challenge you to say, move beyond accountability, create your own narrative, become your own architects, take what is yours, a generation endowed with technology, endowed with skills and creativity, where you don't have to wait for this generation to just hand you the baton with the burden, but you can create your own race that you are in. You don't have to wait for us to hand you the baton to finish this race that you will be in. Create your own race, run your own race, and you have everything that it takes to win your own race. So I hope that, you know, you will work with our generation, but that you will not just wait for our generation to hand over to you something that would become a huge burden and a challenge to you, but that you will start even before you receive that burden to begin to innovate and create a new future that will allow you to navigate the challenges that we will face in this decade and the decades to come. So I have great hope. We are really honored to be partnering as Accord and Global Peace with All Africa Students Union. We want to wish you well on this 9th conference, and I look forward to a stimulating conference and an engaging debate. I thank you, moderator, for this time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vasu. We are the masters of technology, and so we cannot accept things to be business as usual. We must demand accountability from those who rule us. Please join the conversation. Tweet at us, ASU_72. Join us on Instagram, ASU_72. You can follow us on Facebook, ASU1972. It is our hope that you join the conversation using the hashtag ASYS2020. Our next speaker, Professor Goski Alabi, is a Ghanaian academic, practitioner, and entrepreneur. She was the founding dean of the School of Graduate Studies at the University of Professional Studies, Accra. She is currently the president of the Lawer Open University, which happens to be the first accredited Open University College in Ghana, established in 2014. Professor Alabi has been a friend of the union, a patron of the union, and a supporter of youth interests. I now yield the floor to Professor Alabi.
Thank you very much. It is always a pleasure to be a part of your very well organized and active summits. As I joined the 9th summit, I wish to congratulate all of ASU for a good job done. Indeed, this year we have seen quite a number of engagements, webinars, and conferences that you have organized. And I think it's gone a long way to actually pull all of us together, particularly the youth of Africa. So congratulations. And Basu and all my other panel colleagues, I say congratulations, and permit me to stand on already established protocol. The theme that I was supposed to be talking about today is how can young people, or how should young people engage as strategic partners to deliver impact during these critical periods? And I think that Basil had actually gone ahead to put across quite a number of the things I had in mind. Particularly, I wanted to draw our attention to the history of the All African Students Union, and to ask all of us, why is it called the All African Students Union? Why is it not the African Students Union? There is a reason. And that is where I want us to learn from history. Because from history, it is clear that ASU did not start, let me put it that way, in 1972. It started way back in 1925 in the UK, where 2 West African students at the time decided that they were going to start a movement that can bring African students together. And that move that was started by Bankole and the colleague Solanke were actually in response to the needs of the time. It had to do with the fact that at the time we needed, as Bassey indicated rightly, to fight for our freedom, to fight for justice, to fight for our independence and our economic growth. It was a time that the people of Africa needed to demonstrate their relevance and their contribution in the grand scheme of global affairs. So these two students formed the West African Students' Union in the UK to fight against racism and colonialism and to push forward for independence. Eventually, we had the likes of Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, and all those great leaders of the time emerging out of the West African Students' Union. They decided to spread out, preach the gospel, and establish also branches in different regions. There were branches also in the Eastern African countries and many other places in Africa. Now, at the point in time when it emerged that we have really gotten some good leaders from this West African Students' Union who were championing the cause of independence in many different parts of Africa, it was clear that it was now time to pull the different splinter groups together so that we can have a common voice on the continent. And this was how, when those splinter groups were brought together, we got, in my opinion, the All African Students' Union. Our predecessors were quite successful. Today, we are walking in their footsteps, and I want to congratulate ASU for a good job done. In recent years, we've seen a lot of innovation from your end. We've seen a lot of energy. We've seen a lot of advocacy coming from you, and that is great. But the question I ask is, beyond holding our governments accountable, what can we do? What would be our own contributions? What would we be remembered for as youth of Africa, as those our predecessors were remembered for the specific goal that they had put before them, to fight against racism, colonialism, and to promote and support and champion the cause of independence. Indeed, when we speak today, they left footprints, indelible footprints in the sands of time, which can never be forgotten or erased. The question is, what would we be remembered for? And how strategic can we be in garnering that solidarity as youth of Africa, together with other youth around the world, to leave also our indelible footprints? For me, the answer is clear. We have done a number or a lot of advocacy. We have done a lot of accountability, campaigns to hold our leaders and our governments accountable. But we can also contribute by actively leaving that footprints behind. The question I ask is, what lessons can we learn from the pandemic? One of the things I have realized growing up is the fact that a lot of the time we are slowed down by the fears and the excuses of not being adequately prepared, of not having enough resources, and a number of the excuses that hold us from taking the right action for the change we deserve and we want to see to happen. Now, when we look at our resilience and our response in this pandemic, it tells us that those fears are actually unfounded. Why? Because when this pandemic hit us, particularly for Africa, a lot of people did not know that we'd be able to rise up to the occasion the way we have done. Indeed, we have not been as strategic as we ought to have been to have prepared ourselves well ahead for such pandemics, because we have already seen such epidemics happen like Ebola in recent times in West Africa. So as a people, to what extent were we prepared for epidemics and pandemics like that? And as Basu said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What lies ahead may not be too different from what we are beginning to see. Uncertainty and change, rapid change, is going to be the order of the day, whether we are ready or prepared or not. And so it is for us to start thinking futuristically and start preparing ourselves for the task that is ahead of us. And if we have to do that and be successful, then we need to start believing in ourselves. Because many thought that Africans, with all due respect, were going to die like chickens and litter the streets. But there is some wisdom in our practices that we probably may not have as much confidence in as a people. When we look at the fact that we do not have provision of clean water, safe water in many parts of our countries in Africa, if we look at the poverty levels, if we look at the level of education in our part of the world, and when we look at the fact that many of our housing units are crowded with people, often without social amenities like places of convenience, the question is, how has Africa been able to rise up to the occasion of this pandemic? It means that given the opportunity, we could have done a lot more before this time. When we look at the fact that we had to rise up to move in education online, and we were forced to do it, the pandemic didn't need our permission to force us to adopt online teaching and learning, whether we were ready for it or not. But when the necessity struck, we were able to lift ourselves up in the spirit of survival. We knew that we had a common goal to stand together in solidarity and fight against the pandemic. And thankfully, by grace, we have been able to survive the pandemic to this stage. There is reports that we are already in the second wave of the pandemic, and we can begin to see the effects all around the world. So when we look at the way we were forced to rise up to this occasion, it tells us that we really do not have any excuse not to be strategic. And when I like to give an example of Lawa Open University. At the time in 2014, when we started advocating and pushing forward for the need to establish an open university in Ghana. Even regulatory bodies did not have confidence in that process. But today, the pandemic had forced all of us to see the value in rising up to embrace technological mediated education. And so the question I ask again is that beyond advocacy, beyond the 9th summit, beyond holding our governments accountable, how are we as African youth preparing ourselves for the future? What are the needs today? What are the pressing issues of today, as it was in the time when ASU was founded through the West African Students' Union in the UK, where the goal was to fight against racism and also against colonialism and ensure the independence, the political independence of the African states. Today, we as a youth, and I call myself a youth, have the responsibility to rise up to the economic emancipation of the African people, to rise up and prepare ourselves effectively to provide Africa its true and relevance in the global landscape. And so to conclude, I want to say, yes, we have done well. Yes, ASU has been very vibrant, but moving forward, I want to see ASU come back next year and say, this is how we contributed to hunger. This is how we have contributed to poverty alleviation. This is how we have contributed to gender inequality, and for making a difference for those 11 million girls who may not go back to school when schools resume. We want to see this is how we have contributed to safe and clean water and to affordable energy. This is how we have contributed to all the sustainable development goals. Can we see ASU move out there and actually fire that inspiration, that enthusiasm, that vigor into students to say, we are putting up a proposal to have 100-acre land or a 10-acre land in every African state, where the youth will get to the farms and provide food for us, because moving forward, there are going to be serious issues with food security. Are we going to see others help with the innovations and the technology that we have to say that, yes, we are providing safe water and we're doing this practically? On that note, I wish all of us, the African youth, well, and we hope to see some concrete examples from this 9th summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Goski. As always, it's been a delight and an honor to listen to you and to drink from your fountain of wisdom. Africa must attain its true relevance in the global world order, and the youth will have to play its role in doing so. Our next speaker, Dr. Kailas Suthiati. I am delighted to introduce him. He is our speaker. He's a Nobel Peace Laureate, true champion of youth activism, and a great friend of ASU. Kailash has dedicated his life to supporting the rights of children. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for rescuing over 80,000 children from child labor and slavery and leading a global march across 100 countries to demand an end to this injustice. He has also founded the largest global civil society movement defending the right to education and has been relentless in his pursuit to ensure every child is in school. He is the co-founder of the 100 Million Campaign who many of you know, that believes in the power of youth leadership to change the world, and who ASU have been working with for over 2 years now. He has stood alongside us and helped amplify our demands for justice and fair share for the 1 in 5 children living on $2 or less a day throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, securing support from over 80 Nobel laureates and raised it with governments across the world. A leader in building back better, Kailash Chitiati, I am honored to invite you to take the floor and open the 9th Africa Students and Youth Summit. Dr. Kailash, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brother Edmund. Dear sisters and brothers, my dear young friends, once again, it's my honor and pleasure in talking to you. I could recall 2 years ago in Rwanda when I met many of you. I still feel that energy, that enthusiasm. I still feel that warmth and love and compassion. And I still feel the power of African dream that came through African youth, students. ASU has pioneered so many things for equality, justice, and humanity. Under the leadership of dear friends, including my very, very adorable younger brother, Peter, Angela, and many more friends, Edmund, you too. That time, all of us raised voice for 100 million campaign. And you have shown the leadership, particularly Peter, you by joining and being one of the founding members of the 100 Million Trust, which has been incorporated in the Netherlands. But after that, your voices for fair share, for justice, for 1 in 5, during the last year's United Nations General Assembly, also during the time of Laureates and Leaders Summit in this September, you have proven that African young people and students are going to lead the young people of the world. You cannot afford, and you will not afford, to lose the entire generation to this common enemy of COVID-19, the pandemic. So, dear friends, this brings hope not only to African continent, but to the rest of the world. And I personally have faith in you. I always say that Africa is the mirror of the world. And if things are not well in Africa, perhaps the world is not in good shape. We have all experienced many injustices, inequalities, apathy. The pandemic has exposed and exacerbated it. So that's why I call this pandemic is not only a health crisis or an economic crisis. It is the crisis of justice. It is the crisis of morality. And it is the crisis of civilization. A new world is under shaping. What kind of world we wanted to make? Who is going to decide on it? If the same players, if the same actors, if the same decision makers are going to take it on, then I'm afraid that we can never get that justice and equality which we are all fighting for, especially the young people. We cannot simply depend on those leaders, because the real leaders, not of tomorrow, but for today's leaders, are you. The leaders are in you. The change which is knocking the door, and we have to embrace that change, will not come from outside. This change is you. This change is within you. And therefore, 100 million campaign, ASU, which is one of the leaders of this campaign, as well as Nobel laureates, world leaders, and other moral authorities have joined hands together. And we have all collectively gave a call, fair share for children. We have never been able to get the fair share in any walk of life. And therefore, the young people have to demand the fair share in polity, in economy, fair share in policies and enforcement of laws, fair share in education, fair share in all walks of life. As you know, that the wealthiest countries have announced 8 or more, but at least $8 trillion as the COVID-19 response fund. But we also know, and we also feel pain and anger, that most of the money is allocated to rescue their own economies. That is not bad. They should. But some single industries are being given more money than the cumulative support from the developing countries and marginalized people. Is it not immoral and shameful that only 0.3% of this $8 trillion is being allocated for the marginalized people through the multilateral support? Not even 1% or 0.5%, 0.13%. I know that the conventional politicians and politics can tolerate it. But the people like you, my dear young friends, who fought many battles and won many battles against apartheid, against colonialism, against many forms of injustice, even in the universities and colleges, on the issues of fee rise, on the issues of other kind of inequalities and injustice, your voice could not be ignored by anyone. And that voice, which has a lot of purity and power, is needed for the rest of the world for this fair share campaign. We have also demanded that at least $1 trillion, which is fraction of that money, which they are spending for their people, for their businesses, financial institutions, and industries. This fraction of $1 trillion must be immediately allocated for the marginalized children and their families in the developing countries, low-income countries. This is going to help in saving the life of 70 million people. And if we are not going to do it, we know that 24 million children will not see their classrooms again. We know that dozens of millions of children would be found on streets and factories and mines and prostitute houses. Children who were holding pencils and books in their classrooms would be forced to take guns, would be forced to take tools in their hands. Can you tolerate this? I know your anger inside you, and I call upon you to be angry. Not for violence, not for revenge, not for destruction. Your anger must be channelized in good ideas, innovative ideas, and collective action to lead Africa and to lead the world. Next year is important. United Nations has announced this year as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. And we know that Africa, some part of Asia, some part of Latin America remain the home of exploitation of children. I visited many places in Africa, many countries in Africa. Some countries and some places which were very difficult to reach. I told this story which is so close to my heart. One day I was sitting in a very remote village in Ivory Coast, Koteva, where the children were working in cocoa beans farms. And as you know, chocolate is a dozens of billion, over $100 billion industry. And these American and European companies, some Japanese or Australian companies, are flourishing at the cost of sweat and blood of those children. When I was talking to them and I asked a group of them, my dear sons, my dear daughters, how do you like chocolate? These boys and girls having bruises and scars on their bodies looked at each other with empty eyes. They were murmuring, what is chocolate? They were asking to each other. I said, chocolate is a sweet candy bar. Children all across the world love chocolate. But I was so ashamed. As my children, my daughters and my sons, who is losing their childhood and their freedom and their future for making this cocoa bean and chocolate, had never seen, had never tasted chocolate. I cannot allow this to happen. And I call upon you, my dear friends, that this justice must go. This justice must end. Injustice must end. This injustice must go. And therefore, the next year, Peter, in your leadership and the leadership of many of the young friends, I know you are planning a big campaign that would be finalized and announced soon. But let me repeat it again, that people like me were hoping that the world will learn some lesson from this pandemic. The lesson of unity, the lesson of compassion, the lesson of mutual responsibility, universalization of responsibility, and the lesson of globalization of compassion. How can we survive without each other, walking on the same earth, facing the same enemy of pandemic? Unfortunately, we don't see much positive results in it. But it does not mean that the powerful voices and the purity of your hearts, the brilliance of your minds, young people, is going to stop us in globalization of compassion. Nothing can stop us in universalization of justice. Nothing can stop us in building equality and equity in the world. And that's why no leader, no country, no society can do it alone. It could be done, and it would be done through the unity of students and the youth across the globe. I'm so happy and so proud that during last few years, after the launch of this campaign and after my my participation in Asys Rwanda conference, we have seen that the right from Liberia to Zimbabwe, from Kenya to Chad, from Burkina to Cameroon, we have seen how the youth were mobilized, and not only they raised some policy issues, global policy issues profoundly, but they also, in many countries, they have also been able to mobilize and galvanize the communities for the betterment of marginalized children. Dear friends, we have to ensure that the governments allocate fair share in their countries, in their budgetary allocations. 20% for 20% marginalized people. We cannot compromise, we cannot stop, we cannot tolerate. We have to get it, 20% for 20% people. And this is not for now. This is not only from the COVID-19 relief funds or COVID-19 response funds. It should be a culture, it should be a new norm, 20% for 20% people. And also in case of ODA funds, we have to ensure that 20% of ODA should go for 20% marginalized children and their families in the low-income countries. 20% for 20% every aspect of life. I once again applaud your leadership. Remember, dear friends, that we as young people cannot be a part, if some fuel or lubricant of a big system, of a big engine, what we call the growth engine. The people who are the controllers of that growth engine, they just throw a bite of bread in the name of career, in the name of good job, in the name of good life. But what they are getting out of it, they are using us, young people, and we have to stop it. We have to understand it and stop it. We should not be manipulated and misguided by certain politicians, because the future is in our hands. They are not the future of the world. You are the future of the world. Whatever we see today should not happen tomorrow as injustice and inequality. And I once again express my fullest solidarity as your friend, as your brother, though I am 66-year-old, but you can cut me half, not my body, but my age. So you can consider me 33 or even 23. I won't mind if you consider me 23, just decrease my 40 years. So that is fine for me, because I strongly believe that those who have courage to question and those who have resilience and persistence to find the answer to those questions against any wrong, they can never become old. So you should have courage to question, each one of you. You are the source of power. And once again, I thank you for listening to me. You can always count on me as your brother and a kind of household Nobel laureate. So there are so many young Nobel laureates. You can always consider and count on them. But Kailash Satyarthi is your brother, friend, and your own Nobel laureate. And I will follow you. You are my leaders. You are my champion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kailash. Nothing can stop us in globalizing compassion. And I don't think I'll ever forget this quote from you. Nothing can stop us from globalizing compassion. And dear friends, we need to globalize compassion. We need to spread the love across, as Dr. Kailash has advised. Visit us, asys2020.asuonline.org/resources, and there are actions to take. Support some of the campaigns we are making. Let our voices be heard. Tweet at us, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook. Use the hashtag ASYS2020. Let the whole world hear our demands, because the purity of our hearts cannot be ignored. The loudness of our voices cannot be ignored. For those of you who enjoyed Dr. Vasu's presentation, he will be engaged in a one-on-one session at 1 o'clock. You click on it on your program outlines and you'll be able to join in that session. So Dr. Vasu will be engaged in a one-on-one question and answer session. So for those of you who enjoy the presentation, please do join us then. There are several side events arranged for participation of participants, and we are hoping you can join. I would like to announce for the attention of participants that the Global Students Forum will be organizing a side events for this summit. They will be discussing the Global Students Forum and the African region. The Hiki Nawiri Africa will also be organizing another side event between 12:30 and 1:30, reimagining human rights and social justice from a university student's lens. And it will be helpful to receive the opinion and inputs of all participants in these side events. I again remind all of us that Dr. Vasu will be speaking in a one-on-one session hosted by Ms. Baira Nateko at 1 o'clock, and we are hoping that as many participants as possible will be able to join us. The links are available. They have been sent to you earlier, some few minutes ago, and it was also sent this morning. The Zoom links that were sent this morning, you can click on the corresponding link and you'll be able to join. Again, you can join by clicking on the program outlines as distributed early on. Thank you very much. I think the president will be joining us later in other sessions. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our distinguished guests, Dr. Vasu from Accord, Professor Goski from the Lawe Open University. I'd like to thank the Nobel Peace Laureate, Dr. Kailash. I would like to thank the Secretary General of the All Africa Students Union. This is just the opening of the 9th Africa Students and Youth Summit. It is my hope that you will participate in the side events, you will participate in the breakout sessions, you will participate in the plenaries. And I would like to remind all of us that at 1 o'clock, Dr. Vasu will be joining us again for the one-on-one question and answer session. I know you might be having questions on elections and COVID-19. How is Africa managing? We want to hear from his expertise, understand how Africa can manage, how as young people we can also contribute in this discourse. So after the side events, we expect that participants will be joining us for the breakout sessions at 1:30 GMT. The breakout sessions will end at 2:30 GMT. There is another high-level panel discussion to discuss education at the brink of collapse, finding sustainable funding to protect education. We want to discuss sustainable funding sources, and this panel will be at 2:35. It is our expectation that as many participants as possible will be able to join in this all-important panel session. It will be live again on YouTube, the same link that you have joined us. Once again, it's been my privilege to host you for this opening session. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of this summit.